Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome if you're new here. Today we're going to focus on cool seasons that are affected the most by the temperature of color or the coolness of color. So in this video, we're going to focus on talking about true winter and true summer, what the similarities and differences are between these two types, and clues and tips on figuring out whether you belong to one of these seasons and how to decide which side of the spectrum you would fall closer to. For those of you that are new, in the description I've provided links to the different playlists that organize all my videos on finding your best colors, so make sure to check them out, preferably after this video. Now last week we focused on seasons that are affected the most by the warmth of colors, true spring and true autumn, or warm spring and warm autumn, however you want to call them depending on which color analysis system you're familiar with. So true winter and true summer are the other two seasons that are also affected the most by the temperature of colors. But these two are the counterparts of the warm seasons in that coolness of colors is their dominant trait. That means similar to true warm seasons, colors found in the true cool seasons lean far towards the cool side of the spectrum when it comes to temperature. But on the scales of value and clarity, they range somewhere in the middle. So they're more neutral on the spectrum of value and clarity in that they don't really lean far towards one side. So let's first talk about what happens visually to the skin tone when people whose best colors depend the most on the coolness of colors above any other characteristics. Let's take a look at what happens when they wear the wrong temperature. So a tip on figuring out whether you're in a cool season, and more importantly, whether you're the type that's sensitive to the temperature of color, is to examine yourself against a warm color really close to your face. It could be in your clothing, it could be your hair color, or it could even be tested with lipstick colors as well. And what happens with skin tones that are sensitive to the temperature of colors and can't tolerate warm colors all that much is that when you wear a warm color close to your face, the higher ratio of yellow that's present in the color you're wearing is going to bring out more yellowness in your skin tone by assimilation effect. This effect is consistent for everyone, whether you're in a warm or a cool season. But if you're in a cool season and you're sensitive to the temperature of colors, the effect makes your skin tone appear sallow and unhealthy, as opposed to for those that belong to warm seasons, the effect is still present in that the yellow is still being highlighted in the skin, but that effect makes the skin tone appear less pale and more balanced, healthy, and luminous. Similar to that, when you place a cool color against a skin tone, the higher ratio of blue present in the color enhances the blue pigments of your skin tone this time. And if you belong in a cool season, the enhanced blue pigments in your skin makes your skin tone appear more balanced, whereas if you belong in a warm season, wearing a cool color highlights an unhealthy grayish tint in the skin in a pale and lifeless way. So in the end, the goal of using the temperature of colors you wear is to make your skin tone appear more balanced within the warm to cool spectrum. And if your skin tone needs very cool colors against it in order to bring balance to the skin's appearance in terms of temperature and to prevent the skin tone from appearing excessively sallow, then that obviously means that temperature is a very important characteristic of color for your skin tone. Now, what are some differences between the two true cool seasons then? When it comes to comparing the two seasons, the words to focus on are contrast and clarity. In my video on the importance of contrast, I mentioned that all winters have high contrast because whether through clarity or through value, a high level of contrast always exists for the winter colors. On the other hand, summers would be the opposite of having lower contrast because they're higher in value and lower in clarity, with true summer having a little bit of a higher contrast level than light or soft summers because it's related to true winter in temperature. Now, when it comes to contrast, we tend to focus a lot on value because it's an extremely simple concept. It's essentially the difference between the darkest and the lightest parts of your overall coloring. But clarity, I think, is where things can get a little more confusing. Clarity when it comes to skin tone is often compared to the natural glow of your skin. And I don't mean that in terms of wearing a highlighter or a glow enhancing product, but it's more about how your natural skin either has a more glowy or a matte appearance to it. I saw this concept explained in one of the Korean YouTube channels that I follow, and I personally really like this approach, which uses direct versus indirect light as a reference to describe the clarity level. So spring and winter, because they're on the higher side of the clarity spectrum, the glow in the skin or in the hair or the eyes will look like there's a direct light shining on the face, whereas autumn and summer are on the softer side of the spectrum, so it looks more like an indirect light is being reflected on the skin, hair, and eyes. And this makes sense in relation to the contrast level because, like we talked about, if contrast can be determined using the difference between the darkest and the lightest parts of your overall coloring, then the more glow there is, or the more it looks like there's a direct light shining on you, the bigger the difference between the lightest and the darkest parts, as opposed to an indirect light, which wouldn't add as much lightness to certain parts of your features. So I really liked this analogy of visualizing direct and indirect light reflecting on your features as a way to compare and assess your clarity level. For some of us, I'm sure that determining the clarity level can be quite straightforward, but for a lot of us, if everybody that looks like us all have dark eyes, dark hair, and dark skin, it can be a little bit trickier to figure out and compare these things in an obvious manner. And this concept of clarity is going to continue to come up as we dive into the other subseasons throughout the series, so make sure to remember the direct versus indirect light analogy. So the seasonal color system uses the 4 seasons of the year because the colors belonging to each season are colors that we subconsciously associate to these seasons. And those associations can also evoke certain emotional or characteristic attributes. For example, with spring and autumn, the warmth of the colors evoke an inviting and approachable feeling, and spring colors that are brighter and clearer are associated with more of an uplifting, energetic, fresh, youthful, and playful feel. And with autumn colors, they're a bit more toned down and richer, earthier, which are associated with a cozier, more grounded, and slightly more mature and weighted feel than spring colors. For colors on the cooler side of the spectrum, because the colors contain more blue and less yellow, overall the colors become more crisp, refreshing, calmer. I personally think that cooler colors have more of a clean-cut look to them, and they have less of an eye-catching effect than warm colors because warm colors contain yellow, which is a very bright and eye-catching color compared to blue. But everyone can interpret colors differently, so let me know what cool colors mean for you in the comments. Now, if we think of winter, the typical images that we associate with the season are things like snow and ice, obviously the coldness in temperature, which can also be translated as less liveliness because, all the trees have lost their leaves, the grass underneath is dormant, animals are also dormant, and there's less life to be seen in general. So the energy we associate to winter colors are very cold and clean and clear, I should say, but much less lively and inviting than spring or autumn colors. And then when we think of summer, we usually associate it with images of the ocean and the waves, a sandy beach, the sun and the heat kind of softening and melting everything, so it's a bit mellow overall. Now, if we go back to the naming conventions of the seasonal color system, true seasons are labeled true because these color palettes are the most representative of what we typically associate with when we think of the 4 seasons. So true winter colors evoke the emotions or attributes of being clean-cut, modern, a bit more distant perhaps, less enthusiastic and passionate than warm colors, but more controlled, chic, more assertive or charismatic, etc. And with true summer colors, as the colors become slightly lighter and also softer, that reduced level of clarity in the colors enhances the feeling of softness, less clean-cut or contrasted, maybe slightly calmer, and they don't make as bold of a statement as winter colors. Again, like I said, everyone sees and feels colors differently, so you might not agree with all of the words that I've just used to describe the attributes related to these seasons, but these are sort of the general descriptions of the typical images and attributes we associate to the summer and winter palettes. Now let's take a look at some examples to visualize everything we've just talked about. Whether you're a true winter or a true summer, because you're the most sensitive to the temperature of colors, warm colors will enhance that sallowness in the skin like we talked about earlier. Whereas cool colors make the skin appear not only more balanced in temperature, but clearer and more refreshed, which matches the crisp feeling of the cool seasons. Also, because these types are so sensitive to temperature, the visual effect on the skin tones is quite noticeable even with slight variances in the temperature of colors. If we look at these yellows, for example, these are technically cool yellows, but yellow is a warm color to begin with, right? So even if you make a cool yellow, the color is not going to be extremely cool, but it's going to be more of a neutral-ish type of color. And on these specific examples, we can see how the cool yellow, even though it's cool technically, still has a visual impact on the skin tone, and that sallowness starts to be more present in the skin. So again, depending on where on the spectrum you sit, there can be certain colors from the broader palette or color groups that your skin tone might not be able to tolerate, as well as some other colors. Now, this visual effect of sallowness in the skin tone is similar between true winter and true summer. So let's take a look at how to distinguish between the two. First of all, for winter colors, like I said, contrast is a key element for winters in general, so they can handle a high level of contrast very, very well. As you might already know, black and white are sort of the staple winter colors, right? And like I talked about in my contrast video, black and white also create a very high level of contrast, which true winters can wear quite well. Despite the white and black both being very stark and eye-catching against the skin, true winters really have little to no resistance against this high level of contrast. And because of this need for winters to have contrast, once we go too far into pastels where there isn't enough of a difference between the skin tone and the clothing, the presence of the person is a little bit lost for these types when there isn't enough contrast. Even with the cooler color, and despite this color technically belonging to the broader true winter palette, again, we can see how in this specific example, the color doesn't create enough contrast. A pure white is a much better choice in the overall contrast level against the skin, and also in harmonizing with that clean-cut, sharp, and controlled energy of the winter season. Here's another example. With this outfit, the blue in the dress is a much brighter color, and the white obviously creates a high level of contrast against the skin. But I mentioned before in relation to contrast how patterns have a tendency to lower the contrast level because it acts as a way to break up a solid color. Now, obviously, when we're talking about this, we have to compare the same colors between a solid and a pattern, not compare like a grayish, very low contrast color against the pattern. In this dress, because the detailed and delicate pattern breaks up the solid white and lowers the overall contrast, despite the blue being a pretty bright color suitable for winters, for these types, a bolder, larger pattern like this that creates a higher level of contrast works much better. I mean, she is really, really pretty, so it might just look like she looks great in everything, but I think for winters, contrast is so important that it makes patterns a little bit tricky in general, unless they're bold and they can still create a high enough level of contrast. So avoiding small and delicate details in the patterns is the key for these types in general. But like I said, it depends on where exactly you sit on the spectrum. So if you lean much closer to true summer, you will have a wider range of contrast levels that you can kind of play with. So how high of a contrast you need is a very good indicator to see if you're closer to winter or summer. Now, on the flip side, if we look at true summer examples, true summers, like I said, have a higher contrast level than the light or soft summers because of their relationship to true winters. And again, depending on how close you are to the winter side of the spectrum, the range of contrast level that works for you can vary. But usually the level of contrast that works for these types isn't a very high level of contrast like it is for winters. Like these black and white combinations, for example, can be a little too harsh for true summers. And the overall feeling of the color combination as well, the harsh and clean-cut contrast created by the black and white is very much leaning towards that clean and controlled winter energy. So you might need some elements to soften up that overall feeling with accessories or something that can add a break in between the black and white, sort of a bridge color in between. True summers are still summers, so their contrast level isn't too high because they are still on the opposite side of the spectrum from winter in terms of clarity and value. And some true summers might fall closer to soft summer or the light summer. So I would say medium contrast or medium high contrast if you're really close to the winter side of the spectrum, but very high contrast levels appear too bold and rigid for these types. So opt for a navy and gray instead of black and white or navy and denim. Another factor you can look at as a hint is to see how low in value you can go with the colors. Generally, winter colors are darker in value and summer colors are the opposite. So you can see how dark dark of a color your skin tone can handle without feeling like the color is weighing you down. And again, summer colors are slightly lighter and also softer, so that feeling of softness and the feeling of being less clear-cut or defined or bold, you can use that as an indicator to see which side in terms of the overall image and feeling that the color palette creates is more suitable for your inherent impression. With that said, true summers generally have a greater ability to wear more intricate patterns and lighter and softer colors, including pastels. If you feel like you're very much close to the middle of the spectrum between true winter and true summer, what you can try is a clean-cut red lip versus a more smudged type of a softer red lip. Again, the clean-cut style versus a softer, more gradient style dictates the level of contrast between the lips and the skin. So if you're using the same color but smudging the outline or using a more gradient style suits you better, that might also be an indicator that a slightly lower contrast level might be more suitable for you and vice versa, or that the more muted and less rigid summer energy is what's more suitable for your overall image. But one thing to be mindful about this tip is that if you have any proportional aspects within the face that might make a bold red lip appear unnatural in general, like a long philtrum or very narrow lips that you don't necessarily want to draw more attention to, then a bold lip color might just not work for you in general regardless of your season. If you're curious to know more about why a bold lip might not be suitable for your proportions, I have a separate video on that which dives into the details related to your facial proportions, so definitely check that out next if you haven't already. I also have a short on how to wear a red lip in a more natural way, which is pretty much a tutorial of that smudged lip line and a gradient color look I was talking about earlier, so make sure to check that out as well. I hope you found the video helpful, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, stay unique and stay gorgeous.